Now let's create grid with Figma. It's super easy process, but I want to show you absolutely every single element of it. You know how to create frames, so create a frame for your project and just follow me step by step and you understand how to create grid. We'll create a grid for 3 different types of projects: mobile app, desktop website, and a presentation. But we will start with something super popular and most used: website. Here, once you created a frame for your website, select the frame, and here on the right side you will see layout grid. Press on this plus sign and you will see that the grid will be created. By default, Figma creates a grid 10 by 10 pixels. So as you can see, all the cells are 10 by 10 pixels. When you click on this menu here and you see size, you can change the size to whatever you want. It can be 20, so it will be 20 by 20, 100 by 100, or just 4 by 4. Depends on the project that you're creating. You can use this grid if you want to. Usually I don't use it. Honestly, I don't use it at all. Yeah. Then you see color here. With the color, you can change the color of these lines. By default, it's red, but honestly, you can change it to whatever you want. It can be blue, or it can be gray. Use depending on what is the best for you. I'm using gray color, and usually I change the opacity. You see here, I can change the opacity. I changed opacity to like 20, so I see the grid, but at the same time, it's not distracting me from what I'm creating because I'm using gray color. If you have lots of gray elements in your design, I recommend you to use the color of the grid that will be different from what you are designing. In this case, you will know what is grid and what is a design element. So that's why choose the color that you want, but let's go with something that goes by default. Let's go with a red one. As I already said, I'm not using this type of grid, but when you click here on this drop down, you see that there are different options: grid, columns, and rows. It means that you can switch between 3 different types of grids. Grid, as you can see right now, it creates a set of line, horizontal and vertical lines with the distance between them exactly what you will set here, size. When you set columns, you'll create the columns for your grid, and when you create rows, you'll create rows. Let's go one by one and create exactly like every single type of grids so you will understand how to create them and how to work with them. Let's go to columns. And now by default, Figma gives you 5 columns, but you can change its size to absolutely any number of columns. Here, when you click the drop down, you will see from 1 to 12, but doesn't mean that you can create only 12. You can create even 20. Just type it here and you will change it to the number of columns that you need. Or you can set auto, and in this case, it will just set you like all the possible numbers. I'll show you how to use auto in the future. But right now, because we are creating the grid for a website, use 12. 12 column grid is the most popular type of grid for websites because it's the most flexible and allows you to create, I would say, yeah, it's like almost 99% of all the projects. That's why I recommend to use 12 column grid. With color, we already defined that, you know how to change it and what it's used for. Let's go further. You have then type of grid. To understand better the grid, it's better to learn more about anatomy of grid, what it consists of. And to see it better, I'm going to change now one amount margin to explain you what is where. First of all, what do we have here? We have 12 columns. They are in red color. 12 columns. So this is column. Now, the distance between columns, exactly between columns, not between the edge of the layout of the frame and the column, but between columns, is called gutter. all these things came to digital design from print design. If you want to learn more about grids and layouts, I recommend you to take a look at my grids and layouts masterclass or typography masters course. Typography masters course covers absolutely every single aspect of design, from research, information architecture, visual hierarchy, and including grids, layouts, font psychology, absolutely everything that you need to design absolutely anything in UX UI design. Let's get back to our grid anatomy. So grid consists of column, the distance between column called gutter, and now the distance between left side of the frame or layout or screen and right side of the screen and the column called margin. So this distance is margin, this is column, this distance is gutter, and this is column again. Which means that all the parameters that you see here, we can change them to whatever we want to achieve the best result of the grid that we want to build. As you can see, we also have parameter width, but it's not active right now. Why is it so? Because width is related to width of the column. And because we set the type stretch, now the column, we can't change the width because the width is defined mathematically. It's the distance, it's, let's take a look at the size of our frame is 40 and 40. And in this case, width of the column is, yeah, I love math, so that's why I want to show you so you better understand why we don't see width, and maybe you want to calculate width of the screen. So width of one column will be 40 and 40. This is the entire width of our screen, minus 2 times margin size. This is what we set for our margin is 100. So basically it's 100 here and 100 pixels here. So this one, and minus gutter multiply 11 because we have 11 gutters between 12 columns. If you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, we have 11 gutters. And all of these guys divisible by 12. This is width, or you can call it column width. Let's set it to smaller. This will be the width of the column. When you set the type of the column of the grid to stretch, so it will be calculated, which means that if I take our website and change its width, I will still have margin 100, gutter 20. The only thing that will change is the width of our screen because we are changing it, and also the width of our columns because the width is calculated. This is how it works when you set the type of grid stretch. And this is super convenient when you're designing websites that in the future you will use, for example, want to design a larger version for the larger screen. Let's imagine for 1920. You can use stretch one. What exact type to use? I recommend you again to take a look at the Typography Masters course. Now, let's talk let's get back to our stretch. Okay, margin, you understood that this is the distance between left and right side. So if I set to 200, then 200 pixels here, 200 pixels here. At the same time, I can change the gutter to, let's imagine, 60. And now our columns are really narrow, but we have a really huge distance here. It's like 60 pixels here. Let's get back to 20 and 100 here, for example. That's it. That's everything that you need to know about the stretch type of 12 column grid. Not only 12 column. Again, if I set to 6, then still margin is 100, gutter is 20, but the size of the column will be calculated using the formula that he showed you before. Now, what else do we have here? What types do we have? We have type center. When I set type center, now I don't have offset. Offset is basically our margin. This is the distance from left and right. But I have width of the column. So now the grid will be calculated and will be built on the screen, right from the center of the screen. And it will be defined by the size of the column, width of the column. It will not be calculated based on width of the screen, but you define what the size of the column will be. So that's why we see width here, and we can set it to, for example, 80. And now you know exactly that the width of one column is 80 pixels, gutter between them is 20, and now the offset, the margin, will be calculated. We can check it here. When we're creating a rectangle, you see that the rectangle width is 80. And let's create another rectangle here. And you see that the gutter, the distance between columns, is 20. The only thing that will be calculated and will change when we will change the width of the screen will be our offset or margin. Now it's 130 pixels. But if I change our grid, not our grid, but our frame size, if I make it bigger, you see that the only thing that is changing is our offsets. This type of layouts is really incredible when you're designing landing pages. So your content will be always in the middle of the screen. And the only thing that will change is the distance from left and right. That's it. So the distance, you will have more white space from left and right, and all the content will be right in the middle. Yep. So this is the center, the type of the grid, center. Now let's take a look at two other types, left and right. They work absolutely the same, but one will be built from the left and another one will be built from the right. When I set left, you see that now all parameters are, we have access to all parameters here, width, offset, and gutter. How is it possible? Well, it just means that when I take this frame and when I change, as you can see, I'm changing its width, the distance from the left stays the same. The size of the column stays the same. The size of the gutter stays the same. The only thing that is changing is the right side. Let's take a look here and let's change parameters so you will see what exactly is happening when we change something. We build the type, set the type of the grid left, width of the column is 80, offset is 100. Let's change it to, let's imagine, 40. And now you see that this distance will be 40. Gutter is still 20, width is 80, and only this size will change. This specific width between the most right column and the right edge of the screen. The same will happen when I set to right, then the distance on the left side will change, everything else will stay the same. Where do we need to use these grids? When you are designing, for example, a dashboard that has a sidebar that will be always on the left, then you can use this type of grid for the dashboard. Yep. Super convenient stuff. Usually people don't know about it, don't know where to use left and right type of grid. It's super powerful tool when you know how to use it. If you want to know more about left and right type of grid, take a look at the grids and layouts masterclass. In most of the cases, people are using center or stretch. Choose whatever you want. It all depends on your project and how to work with them. Now you know everything about how to create columns. Column grid. 12 column grid is created right here. Super fast and easy. The second thing that I want to show you is how to create a grid for mobile app. When you're designing a mobile app, you do absolutely the same. Layout grid, set here columns, but in this case for count, I recommend you to use not 12, but 4 or 2. Again, it depends only on your project. Sometimes I use even 7 columns. You might ask, if you're designing mobile applications, you might ask like, where are you using 7 column grid? Well, when I'm designing sliders with like different cards, in this case, I can use 7 column grid that allows me to show 2 cards on the screen and part of the third card also on the screen, so people understand the law of continuity, Gestalt principle, law of continuity. It shows people that they can scroll horizontally. This is where I use 7 column grid. Again, grids and layouts masterclass is mind-blowing, covers all these things. But let's create the grid, the most popular grid for mobile app. So usually it's 4 or 2, depends on your project, depends on how many elements you have on the screen. You can go, let's go with the simplest one, is 2 columns, stretch, but for the margin, use 24, something from 16 to 32. These are the most popular sizes for distances from left and right screen, edges of the screen. Let's set margin 24. Gotta, you can go with 16. Again, from 16 to, I will go to 24. These are the most popular sizes. They all depend only on what elements, what objects you will be using on your mobile screen. If it's a slider, then you can go with something else. If you have 2 columns elements, then use this one. If you need more flexibility, if you want to show, for example, numbers of something, let's imagine you are creating some kind of dashboard and it will be temperature, then I don't know, time of the day, then how many times it was switched, and then something else. Then you can go with 4, and then it will be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and below it will be the description, the label of it. In most of the cases, yeah, people are using just 2 columns, and you can go with these parameters. If you want to have a little bit more white space from left and right, then go with something like this. If you want to go with something, if you want to fill in the space, in this case, you can go with 16. I don't recommend to go less than that. In some cases, you can set even 0. Trust me, it's possible. But my recommendation is to go with 16. It allows you, it gives people, it gives users ability to actually see where our design starts from, and to see the differentiation between the edge of the screen and the content itself. So these are the parameters that you can use for mobile apps. And now let's go to our presentation mode to create a grid for your presentation. Again, click here, columns. And my recommendation for, in this case, to go with 8 column grid or 7 column grid. And I'll explain in a second why. So when you're using 8 column grid, it's just similar to what we have for websites, 12 column. Here you can set 120 and 20 Gada, just perfect like that. Sometimes you can set Gada to 0. And when I design, I'll be honest with you, when I design presentation, I use Gada as 0. So I see only lines. I can change the opacity of lines so I can see them a little bit better. In this case, I don't have this space between columns, but I see just lines, and when I create absolutely anything, everything will be exactly between these lines, exactly between these lines. When I create, for example, image on the right and text on the left, I know exactly that I define the space between them. But basically, usually in print design, people used these type of grids. They didn't use like columns. They used this type of columns when there is no Gada between them. But the more elements you have, If you want them easily to differentiate the distance between them, then it's better to use columns. For presentation, this is what I use. But let's continue why I want to show you where I use, for example, 7-column grid when I'm designing presentations. I can set to 7 and then see what's happening. When I had 8, I had something right in the middle, like I had the line right in the middle. And it created for me symmetrical grid. So I could create an element, 4-column element on the right and 4-column element on the left. Symmetrical grid. But when we have something like 7-column grid, it gives us asymmetrical view, and it allows me, for example, to create an image on the right that will be smaller than, for example, text on the left. And the text on the left will be, for example, like this. So text will take a little bit more space rather than image. But this way I will guide users' eyes on the text. So you can use this principle if you want to create an asymmetrical view. Again, it's not necessary that you have to create the margin from left and right 120. This is what I use to see. This is where I start, for example. Here it will be Figma Pro Secrets. This will be my label on this side, and below, for example, it will be Art Design Academy. That's it at the bottom. So now everything is perfectly aligned and I have space between like the left edge and the content itself. As simple as that, and I have asymmetrical grid here. Looks perfect, looks beautiful. Sometimes you can go with margin 0 and set, instead of, if you still want to have asymmetrical view but you want to have more flexibility, you can go with 11 columns. In this case, your content can be on the second column, start from the second column. Your image will be, this is where you need to connect your content to the very edge of the screen. It's super convenient when you're creating presentations, because usually we create images that start from the edge of the screen, and this is what you can use. So basically you have 11 columns, but the first column defines the distance for you from the left edge, and then on the right side you will have the image itself. Super convenient, super useful. Use it whatever you want. As you can see, we just created, by the way, how to switch the hide and make visible your grid. Press here, not command, Control G. When you press Control G, in this case, you will start seeing all these lines. Then, if you don't want to see them, Control G again, you don't see them. One Pro Secret, Figma Pro Secrets, lots of them already, but one Pro Secret. When you create, for example, another frame, and let's imagine it will be 1920 by 2000, it will be your new website, but you want to use exactly the same grid as you created for your previous website, for the website with the size 1440. What you can do, just click here between the edge of the right sidebar and the grid. You will see that it will be selected now. Press Command C, select the frame that you just created, and press Command V. And now only this layout grid will be created and added to this layout. This is convenient when you are creating the website, responsive website for different, and you're showing it for developers for different sizes of the screen. That 1440 has the same type of grid as 1920. You just copied it, pasted it, that's it. Super fast. You don't need to create it again. You just copy and paste it. And Figma Pro Secret number, I don't know, it's so many of them. Number N+1. When you're designing mobile applications, I showed you that you can use column grid and absolutely keep column, 2 columns or 4 columns depending on your project. But in addition to that, when you're designing mobile apps, usually, most likely, you're working with also working with baseline grid. And to create a baseline grid, press plus here and select rows. When you created rows, instead of a particular number of rows, set auto, and this is where we're using auto. And here, instead of type stretch, use top. And now for height, use, if you are using, for example, 4-point grid, use 4. And for the gutter, use 4. And it will create you a perfect 4-point baseline grid. As you can see, we have columns like everything together. If you set gutter to 0, then you will just see lines. And if you want to see the difference between color of the columns and color of the rows, the baseline grid, you can change it to a different color. Let's imagine blue. Let's make it a little bit darker. So now you just created the baseline grid. Here we have exactly 4 pixels between lines, and this is how you create the baseline 4 points baseline grid for the mobile application. Super convenient and easy. So now you have fully prepared grid for your mobile app. The same you can do for your desktop. Again, we are not going to spend our time. We select what we learn, Figma Pro Secrets, select the number of rows, Command C, select desktop, Command V, and now you change it from height from 4 to, for example, 10, or if you are working with 8-point grid, to 8. Done. Now the distance between will be 8. Or it can be something divisible by 8, but 16 or 24, or depending on whatever you want to go with. This is how you create the baseline grid. So now you know how to work with grids. Now you know a couple of more Figma Pro secrets. Use them in your work, and I'll see you in the next lesson when we will start working with shapes, but with their parameters. Now you know how to create frames, how to create grids for frames. Now you know how to create shapes. Let's talk about parameters of those shapes. Super useful lesson. See you there.